Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. This is actually going to be like a follow-up video to the video I posted previously about my introduction to mushrooms. I highly recommend watching that one first. I'm sure this video can stand alone as a heroic dose trip report, but the previous video gives a lot of context into kind of my introduction to mushrooms and my very slow and gradual journey towards doing this higher therapeutic dose. So definitely feel free to check that one out first. To be totally honest, I already filmed this video. I wanted to film it in this beautiful place in nature where I live in Colorado, but it ended up being very challenging because there were deer play fighting in the background, being super loud, like crashing their antlers together. There were dogs barking, people walking, and all these things. So I'm going to try my hardest to convey everything I want to in this video, keeping in mind that these psychedelic experiences are like many hours. So I'm going to condense like a 6 to 7 hour psychedelic experience into like hopefully a short enough video. So you will get a lot more context if you watch that video on why I wanted to do a therapeutic dose this high, but just to make a long story short, I'm a person who has walked through a lot of trauma, and I specifically went through infant loss twice. I had 2 full-term pregnancies. My children died shortly after birth, and so obviously that is a very impactful traumatic experience to go through. And so I have done conventional therapy for that, and plant medicine is something that has always kind of called to me, and like I said, you can learn more about that in the last video. But what I'm trying to say, for those of you who may be coming to this video without any context, I went into this very intentionally and set a date aside to do this, and went into it very aware and educated on what I was about to do. I personally think that mushrooms are a very powerful plant medicine. You will hear me refer to them as medicine because I think that there is a different group of people out there, and this isn't right or wrong, but who choose to use them to have maybe a euphoric experience or to escape or XYZ. For me, my relationship with this plant medicine is very much therapeutic. I just think that these mushrooms are absolutely so profound, and the more that I hear about their experiences, the happier that I am that the research is coming back on how they can help people who deal with, you know, severe depression or anxiety or traumatic experiences or addiction. I think that this is going to be absolutely world changing as it becomes less stigmatized, and that's part of why I want to share my story. So let's just dive in. I have found that I have this like underlying hesitancy and kind of overwhelm when it comes to trying to put this experience into words. I think that if you fall down the YouTube rabbit hole of listening to people's trip experiences, you'll find that there's a common theme of having a hard time articulating what the experience was like because it's so absolutely otherworldly, and it's very hard to articulate with vocabulary. Michael Pollan has an incredible Netflix series called How to Change Your Mind, and episode 2 is on psilocybin. I watched that episode before I ever did this, and I was like, wow, yeah, like everyone's having a hard time kind of explaining what these experiences are like. And I also have to say that my experience was extremely challenging. It was the hardest thing that I have ever gone through, and that said a lot considering I went through the birth and death of my children. This was hard. It was hard, and it was also so profound. And I think that that's like, you know, there's a lot to say about like the hard things of life, and how they can transform us and how they can be like the biggest gifts in disguise. And so it's like, part of me is like, gosh, like I don't want to scare people away from the experience, talking about my experience, but the truth of the matter is that even though this was the most challenging thing I ever have gone through, it was also the most powerful, transformational, healing experience of my life. So my experience began by ingesting a smoothie mixture of psilocybin. I want to make it clear that I live in a legal state and I am not encouraging other people to do this. I'm just merely sharing my experience for educational purposes. So I did a little over 5 grams of psilocybin in a smoothie form that my husband made for me. Also worth noting that my husband had already had an experience a profound healing experience on a therapeutic dose of mushrooms, and I wanted him there with me as a trip sitter and someone who could help guide me through the process as someone who had already been there before. I highly recommend, if you're going to do something like this, to have someone either with you in person or someone that you trust who is close to you that knows that you're going to be having this experience, that can kind of be on call for you. It's really impossible, and I mean like seriously impossible, to predict what your experience is going to be like. So having someone there for support is a great idea. I want to also say that when I ingested this, I knew what my intention was, and I still was scared and I still had fear. I think a lot of my fear came from just the unknown and also the inability to go backwards and not take it. Like once you've taken it, you're kind of in for the ride. And that's kind of a scary concept. And I think that it's normal to feel nervous about that. I absolutely did. And so about 30 to 45 minutes in, I'm sitting on my bed. We kind of set up our room very intentionally beforehand to be very calming. I had a diffuser going. I had plants all around. We had the windows open. And I just wanted to kind of set myself up for being as kind of grounded as possible. As I was waiting for it to kind of kick in, I noticed that this storm was rolling in from behind our house, like perfectly in clear view from my windows. And I really felt like it was a metaphor in that moment of the experience that I was about to have. And I know there are some people that might say, oh, because you thought that, that's why you had that experience. But even before I took mushrooms, like in the months leading up to it, I knew that there were things inside of me that I needed to face and to deal with. And I also had that sort of magnetic pull and attraction towards plant medicine. So in the same way that I hear people talk about flying somewhere to do ayahuasca and knowing that they're going in with a specific purpose in mind for healing, I felt that same way. But I just felt like there was this physical representation of this storm brewing in front of me, and I was like, okay. And I felt like fear and nervousness, but I also felt this sort of deep acceptance that like, all right, I'm going in, like I'm gonna go through this and I'm gonna make it out. And I don't know, I think that's important to think about when you're talking about doing these higher doses of mushrooms. Like, it's not going to kill you. You are going to get through it. It's almost like signing yourself up for an adventure that you don't know what's going to happen, and it could be very intense. So about 30 minutes in, I'm starting to feel like I can feel something starting to kick in. I felt like my senses were really heightened. I was starting to get some very loose visual effects. And I also felt the need to go outside in the storm. I was very safe. There wasn't like a risk of being, like the lightning was far enough away. I felt safe, and I asked my husband if we could go out into the backyard. One thing about mushrooms that I feel like is maybe a unique experience for me, I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I feel very like claustrophobic like with clothing, and so I wanted to be completely naked. I just felt like any amount of texture and like the sensory kind of like overload that happens, I think maybe because your senses are heightened, I don't know, I just needed to be completely like free. And so that's what I did, and I was in the backyard, and I was noticing that my visuals were starting to pick up a lot. And so this part's really hard to explain, but I could see sort of this very like rainbow, fractal, like you've seen probably computer generated graphics of like psychedelic, you know, like where everything's kind of like womp womp. You've seen these visuals, I'm sure, in your life. It was kind of like that, but you can't really replicate the full experience like digitally as you are experiencing it like through your own eyes. But one really cool thing that was happening at this point was that as the lightning would strike, I was actually seeing the flash of energy move out from it in this kind of rainbow grid pattern. And it was every single time the lightning would hit, I could see that kind of go out. And then it was starting to sprinkle, and it was kind of like being able to experience every individual raindrop on my skin, and kind of just this very, very heightened awareness. I was sitting in the grass, and I was noticing the trees swaying, and the wind, and the rain, and the thunder, and the lightning. And it was a very immersive sort of like Avatar-like experience. Like, it's really hard to convey with words. I felt very connected to nature, and this is something that I experienced on my kind of medium dose that I took and that I talked about in my previous video. It was just, that feeling was amplified. So I felt like this very connected, harmonious, unified feeling amongst nature, as if there was no separation between me as a human and the tree over there and the grass over here and the ground and the crickets and the whatever. Like, all of nature just felt very connected. About 45 minutes in, I started to feel more emotions rising to the surface, and I'd say that this is when the intensity of my experience started to ramp up. I told my husband in this moment that I was feeling a little bit afraid, because I started to realize that, like, maybe I bit off more than I could chew. Like, I just had this overwhelming sense of like, kind of this like, oh crap moment of, I'm about to go through some stuff. And I'm so glad that I did, but I just have to be so honest that in the moment it did feel overwhelming. And I was so happy to have my husband there, who had gone through his own experience. He was able to kind of just tell me what I needed to hear. He was saying things like, you absolutely can do this. I'm here with you. I'm not going to leave your side. And he was just saying very comforting things to help kind of keep me grounded. So now we're getting into about the maybe hour mark. The storm started to pick up and I wanted to feel more safe. And so I wanted to go back into my house. And at this time I had decided to fast up until this experience, because I heard that it's easier on your stomach if you do. I had noticed in my microdosing and in my medium dose experience that mushrooms, for me at least, and for my husband as well, have a very purging kind of effect. It's not just emotional, but it also feels very physical, almost like they're like this squeegee that's like going in and kind of like cleansing you in a way. And so I felt like I needed to use the restroom. I felt like I needed to like be close to a toilet. I felt like I needed to kind of purge a little bit. And that's obviously like never a fun experience, but it felt like it was necessary for me. And I hear this a lot in the like other plant medicines, ayahuasca and whatnot, that people typically purging as a part of the experience. And so I was a little bit bummed when that started, because I was like, dang it, like it's, you know, it's exhausting physically to have to like purge. And so that was not nice. Also around this time, things were starting to ramp up to a point that I really felt like I needed to get low to the ground for some reason. And so in our room we have hardwood floors, and I was kind of like on those wood floors, and I found myself kind of in this child's pose position on the floor, and I was taking a lot of time just trying to breathe and trying to ground myself and trying to just kind of prepare for all of the things that were coming up. So what was coming up exactly? A lot. There was a lot. It was almost like I was gaining this clarity that I had not had before, of a lot of different life experiences, ranging in like their trauma. So like we have infant loss, which is probably the height of like the trauma of my life. But then also just other experiences within family, within community, within all of these different settings that were kind of being shown to me in a way that it was like, these are things that you are carrying around that are affecting you. And I'm saying that verbally, but it was more like it was a knowing and a showing and a deep kind of like soul level clarity that I was carrying a lot of fear. I was carrying a lot of stress, and I was carrying a lot of trauma. During this experience, it wasn't like I was just calm, like experiencing all this. I really had to focus. I had to breathe. It almost felt like I was in labor. Having been someone who has experienced childbirth twice, it very much felt that way. It was very uncomfortable. It was very painful, not like physically painful, but emotionally painful. And it was very hard. But I had to breathe through these like waves of all of this being shown to me, almost like unpacking. It was like an unpacking and a bringing to the surface of things that were really hard. Also, And this next part is going to be kind of tricky to explain because I do want to protect the privacy of my family, but I was made aware in a very visual way of some ancestral trauma that had been passed down. We have research that suggests that trauma is passed down through our DNA, and all I can really say is I had a very visceral, physical clarity about that. I was able to see visually the kind of family tree line that I was in and my place in the line. Like, it looked like tree roots. The tree roots looked very rainbow, like rainbow kind of fractal tree roots. Imagine a tree made out of rainbows, like made out of rainbow energy. I know I sound crazy, but this is just what it was like. And the energy was kind of moving through, and I was able to see that in this particular side of my family, there were things that were kind of passed down that I was carrying within my DNA. And the medicine was showing it to me and also trying to purge it out of me. And that was very difficult. It was very, oh man, I don't know, like I experienced like this extreme fear that I had. The fear didn't come from the mushrooms, it didn't come from the experience. It was like I was being shown the fear that I carried around. And I just want to say that like a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, I could have never imagined sitting in front of a camera and talking about an experience like this and the judgments that may come. I have experienced more like personal rejection in this past year than I have like in my whole life, because I come from a very conservative background and I have nothing judgmental to say about that. I have complete like love, and I guess I'm speaking to the point that this experience showed me the fear that I had, and it absolutely got rid of it, but I had to go through it first. This next part is going to sound incredibly woo-woo, incredibly insane, and I realize that, but it's just the truth of my experience, and so there's no reason to try to lie or hide or do any of that. And I'm truly like not afraid of what people might think about this part, because again, it was just my experience. There's definitely this experience when you're on this medicine where you feel like there's a veil that has been lifted, where you can experience, you know, seeing the visual energy of things. There are people who might say, oh, well, it's just your brain hallucinating. It's just your brain kind of, you know, there's just chemicals being released that are making you feel this way or see these things. But one experience that you can't explain away is that my husband, who also, he was my trip sitter, but he also took a small amount to be able to kind of connect in that way. That's what he felt like he needed to do. And he was able to sense and see what I was going through without me talking. I was silent for the large majority of this experience, but he was explaining to me verbally what I was going through, and he was very aware of what I needed before I would ask. So at various points I would need a cup of ice, or a slice of apple, or a cup of water, or like a warm towel. And it was as if I was sending the information to him from my mind. I wasn't trying to. I wasn't like, ooh, I'm gonna see if this works telepathically. It was just happening. So he would leave and come back with like ice, and I'm like, how did he know? This is so weird. And he was also explaining to me throughout the experience, like what was like he was able to almost see what I was going through somehow. And then this gets a little crazier and a little weirder, because it also happened with my dog. I have a dog, I have a pit mix, and he is like my soul dog. He's a rescue dog, and he was with me for this whole experience, but he was on our bed, and I at one point was in our bathroom, and my husband had gone to get me something, and I was having a hard moment and I didn't want to be alone. And so in my mind I was like, I just want my dog. He jumps down from the bed, comes into the bathroom, licks my face, and just sits there. And it's like, and it kind of like took me out of the moment for a second, because I was like, how is this happening? So you can call it coincidence, you can call it whatever you want. I just want to be honest and say that that's what happened during this experience for me. There were multiple hours, probably 3 hours, that I was kind of in the trenches. It felt like I was in labor in terms of just having to face these waves of pain, darkness, trauma, fear, all sorts of things that I was kind of carrying inside of me. And at one point, I looked down in my hand, and my visuals, I saw that I was holding a sword. And again, this is gonna sound crazy and I just can't hide it. My husband was there with me and he goes, "Oh my gosh, do you see your sword?" And I was like, how is this happening? Like, I'm not speaking verbally about these things, so I don't know how that works. I don't know how it happened. I don't know if anyone else out there has had this experience, but that happened. So I had this sword, and all of a sudden I kind of had this empowering moment of being like, okay, this is a battle. It really does feel like a battle, and it feels like something that I have to intentionally, instead of trying to hide, I intentionally have to engage with these things. And I think that this speaks to my own previous experience of being someone who suppressed all of my emotions and feelings. If I felt the urge to cry, like my life, I can divide it into like pre-trip, post-trip. So pre-trip me, I would suppress my feelings. I would suppress my anger. I would suppress my that felt need to cry. I would kind of try to get past it very quickly without actually moving through it. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what that meant. And so for me to recognize in this moment, like, oh, I have to actually face all of the things that affect me, all of the feelings that I didn't want to feel, all of the things about myself that I didn't want to see. I have to look at them head on, and I have to fight them. And not fight them in like a violent, like, trying to like be at war with myself. It very much more felt like an empowering sort of moment of being like, I am strong enough to do this. And I kind of felt this courage rise up inside of me that allowed me to move through these things and feel what I needed to feel and see what I needed to see. As hard as it was necessary. This all is gonna sound so crazy. Like, I promise I'm just like a normal person. If you met me like out in life, outside of this YouTube video, you would, like, I'm normal, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a business owner, like I work, this all just seems like, it just feels really surreal to talk about because I realize how crazy it's probably gonna sound. But my daughters, who I lost after birth, were there with me. My grandmother, who passed away, was there, and it was the grandmother who was connected to this sort of ancestral things that I was being shown. She was there, and she was talking to me throughout this experience, as was my sister. My parents had a baby who passed away before I was born. She was there, and it was a very... whether you want to believe that my mind made this up or not, I did feel a very real experience of being supported and guided throughout this as if I was not alone. And it was a really beautiful experience. So the majority of my experience really revolved around having to face a lot of darkness. And I know that probably sounds like, why would you want to do that? But the transformational aspect that came after that was so incredibly profound. I, after about 3 to 4 hours of dealing with a lot of unpleasant, uncomfortable experiences, I felt like the medicine was telling me that it was time to go into cocoon mode. I know that sounds weird. It's not terminology I've ever used in my life before this experience, but I felt the need to go into my shower and lay down in my shower and turn the water on. And we have these kind of glass doors on our shower, and so when you close yourself into it, it definitely feels like this cocoon. I laid on the floor of my shower and I just let the water hit me, and I felt at that moment that the battle, if you will, or the intense experience or the labor, whatever you want to call it, I felt like it was done. Like, I felt like I had done so much work at that moment, and it's really hard to explain what that feels like, but I felt like I needed to go into this time of just, it felt like a time of transition is the only way I can really describe it. It wasn't like I was not in a moment of euphoria or bliss or anything like that. I was definitely still feeling kind of exhausted and like I had burnt out my battery and I felt like I really was craving comfort, and comfort is absolutely what I received at this time. As I was experiencing this kind of cocoon transition mode, I kind of felt like there was a transformation taking place inside of me, like that the battle that I had just fought was productive and was very healing. And again, like I can't explain how this happened or what, but my husband was there outside of the shower, and I remember turning over and kind of sitting up still sitting in the bottom of the shower and experiencing this feeling of being transformed into this body that had these wings that started to shoot out from it, which makes sense if you are going along with the cocoon analogy. I don't know where that came from, but that's what happened and that's what it felt like. And so I kind of experienced the growing of these wings. They were made of like this rainbow fractal energy. Like it was very much like, I don't know how to explain it with words, but I just grew these wings like in this other metaphysical place that I was in. It very much feels like you're in a space and time that the veil is removed and you can kind of just experience all of this happening in this way that is very hard to articulate with words, but I'm trying my best. The craziest part of this experience, once again, is that my husband was on the outside of the shower. I was not saying words at all, and he shouts, like in the most excited way, "Do you see your wings?" And that made me start sobbing because I was like, I'm not making this up. Like, whatever's happening here is real, and I just like have no reason to lie or to hide or to do anything like that of the sort. And so I exited this kind of cocoon mode, and that's when this trip took a turn for the better. And I don't want to say that the previous parts were bad, it was just like maybe it took a turn for the more pleasant part of this. So I was face to face with the most profound, visceral experience of unconditional love that I have ever encountered. I felt the oneness and the connectedness of all living things. I also felt that there was no need to criticize or judge or any other human being. I can recognize that not everyone is acting out of love. I can recognize that there are people who are doing harm either intentionally or unintentionally, and that's not something that I want to just like blindly allow to happen. Like, I'm not saying that unconditional love means not having boundaries, you know, that keep us safe, but it's sort of like this love that I experienced did not have conditions. There was nothing that could disqualify you from accepting and receiving this unconditional love. Something that I talked to my husband about is that, like, okay, if he and I are just human beings, right? Like, we're not deities or entities, or like, we're flawed human beings, and I love him unconditionally. Like, I truly love him. And if I were to say to him, like, I love you so much, and like, that's never gonna change, and I can, like, I'm never gonna leave you, and I'm never gonna forsake you, and I could really mean those things. But if I then also say to him, but if you do something to cross me, or like if you hurt me in any way, or you reject me in any way, I'm going to make sure that you do not experience love, and that you are eternally tormented, or you're tortured for the rest of your life, or I'm going to make your life like miserable. Well, that's not unconditional love, right? Because unconditional love doesn't have conditions, and you can extract whatever you want to extract from that statement, but I absolutely felt this experience of unconditional love. And if that's my own brain that kind of projected that, if that's my own internal self, then wow, that means that we are all capable of not only receiving but giving that kind of unconditional love. And I would say that that's probably the most profound part of this experience. I do not think that this I don't think that that came from me. I definitely experienced an external source of unconditional love, and it has transformed the way that I view all people. And there are probably people in my life that would say that doing something like psychedelics invites demonic forces and entities into your life. And I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, if there are forces of darkness and forces that seek to harm, that showed me that all we need to do is to focus on loving each other without conditions, then I don't really know what to say to that. Because it absolutely has given me this sense of unity and connection to all living things, despite what other people might believe, despite how they act. I feel like there is just this source of unconditional love that is available to us that does not include dogma. It does not include invalidating other people based on their lifestyles. It does not include judging people and putting ourselves above them and thinking that we are right about all of our beliefs. It just was a very, like, we talk growing up in the circles I was in, we talk about being transformed by love, and I can't say that I experienced that to the level that I did until my psychedelic experience. When I meet people, like, it's so much easier to not be in judgment. I think I used to be a lot more critical, a lot more negative, a lot more judgmental until this experience. And though I'm still obviously human and I still have my moments of weakness, I find that it's much easier to connect with and to love people who are different than me. And that love is transformational. I have seen it in my own life now with connecting with strangers and just all kinds of people. I find it much easier to access that unconditional love that doesn't depend on them believing exactly what I believe or living in the exact same way that I live. It's just easier to love. Another thing that I was kind of shown, I guess a lesson from this experience, is that fear is the opposite of love. And so I'm now, it's much easier now to not live in fear and to not let fear drive me. I never would have made this video 6 months ago. I never would have felt confident enough to face my fears of what people would think of me, of how they would judge me, about the criticisms that I would get from even utilizing plant medicine. It doesn't matter to me now because it helped me so much. Like, I just feel authentically myself. I feel permission to be who I am and not to have fear drive me to hide or to try to assimilate with any particular group of people. Like, I just feel very free to exist and to love people exactly as they are and to love myself exactly as I am. Something else that this experience taught me was that I had this underlying current of anxiety that was present with me before this experience that I wasn't really aware of. I don't think that I would have considered myself or labeled myself as an anxious person before this. I wouldn't have said that I would have acknowledged that there were different points of my life where I definitely struggled with anxiety, especially through my pregnancies and through infant loss. But I didn't think that I was someone who kind of carried anxiety through my life with me. It was just that it was so repressed and so buried down inside of me that I wasn't aware that it was there. And now that it's gone, I realized that it was there. And so I don't know how else to explain that other than it was just taken away from me. I just know that I don't feel the same as I did before. Another lesson that I learned from this experience, or another way that I am different now after this experience, was that I had a hard time being in the present moment before. I was kind of always waiting for the next thing, and I think this goes hand in hand with my previous kind of pattern of suppressing hard things. Like, if I was going through something hard or uncomfortable or stressful, it kind of felt all-consuming in a way, and I would just be like, oh, I just want this to be over with. I would just want to be done with it. And now I see a lot of beauty in being able to move through the present moment, even stressful times. I'm not like so quick to try to like hurry past it and find a solution. Like, I feel a lot more at peace with moving through experiences the way that they should be, in terms of allowing my feelings to be there, allowing myself to explore them, allowing myself to kind of move through them in the way that I need to, and to not be so quick to get on to the next like good thing. So to go backwards a little bit, after this experience of having these like wings grow out for me, I just felt this kind of internal transformation that had taken place. And from that point on, as I was kind of coming down from the experience, I felt so much peace. I felt like I had come and faced the things that I needed to face. I felt like I was able to accept the things that the mushrooms were showing me. I was able to just have this increased clarity of how I move through the world and how it was going to be different now. And I can honestly say that I have not been able to access my old ways of thinking ever since that point. It's like once you have seen from this different vantage point, once you have experienced this very visceral, unconditional love, you just like can't go backwards from it. And I'm so thankful for that, because I think like after the experience, like after I spent some time processing it, as the days and weeks went on, I was kind of like had this internal like worry that I was gonna go back to my old way of being, and it just hasn't happened. I find that it's so much easier to love people, to connect with people, to not hold people in judgment, to work through any feelings I have of like where there used to be superiority or ego in the way. It's no longer in the way. I still have moments where I can feel my ego trying to creep in, but feeling that sort of dissolution of self, feeling that sort of, the only way that I can really describe it is that separation is a distortion, like separation is an illusion. Yes, we are all still individual souls who are experiencing this life, but we are one. And I think that the implications of that, if the whole world felt it, the whole world would be totally different. We are just all connected, and I think that the way forward is love. And when we can trace the way that fear enters into our minds and into our day-to-day lives, I don't know, like it's just really easy to see that fear and control are actually the enemy, and that love is the answer. Another lesson that I was shown through this experience is that we have the option and the ability to really impact people for good in our day-to-day life if we are just paying attention. I have crazy experiences now with strangers out in public, whether it's cashiers or just people I meet in my neighborhood out walking. Like truly, we have so many opportunities throughout our day to affect people's lives for the better. This concept that love is the thing that changes people, and that love is not owned by any particular religion or person or belief system. Love is something that is outside of us, and it is something that is within us, and it is something that does not have conditions. Like true unconditional love doesn't have conditions. It's much easier to see that the root of evil and the root of things that are bad are just those things that are driven by fear, control, and things that harm other people. And so when you can kind of view things in that way, it's much easier to choose love in these situations. No one's perfect, and obviously like we still go through stressful experiences and we still have to move through hard things, but at the end of the day, like I just have this knowing that that love is the way forward, and seeing that kind of play out in my life in real time has been just, I don't know, really profound. I also have a deep sense of self-love. I was taught from birth, really, throughout my communities that I was living in, that we are like depraved and like deserving of, you know, like eternal torment and all of these things that are really actually psychologically damaging if you really unpack them. And to be able to come to a point where I can love myself fully is not selfish, and it's not wrong, because when you can love yourself, even the dark parts of yourself, even the parts of you that are hurting or that need healing, when you can fully embrace and accept those parts of yourself with compassion, that's the thing that helps you to evolve and transform. And so you can also think about that outwardly. And when you can meet people's dark parts with love and compassion, it attracts more love and compassion, and it allows them to experience love and compassion even if you feel like they don't deserve it. And so, I mean, I think we've all had experiences, right, where we are meeting hatred with hatred or anger with anger. You know, out and about could be a driver that cuts you off or like does something terrible. And when you can just meet people with compassion and like, I don't know, I just feel like I have a different viewpoint of people now. Like when I meet people out and about who are having a hard time or who are being mean or who are doing something they shouldn't do, it's much easier for me now to be like, oh, like I wonder what they're going through. I wonder what kind of childhood they had. Like I wonder why they feel the need to act this way. And it's just much easier to extend compassion. Even if you have to keep distance to keep yourself safe, it's just much easier to live from a place of understanding and from love than from judgment and from hatred and from kind of that need to tell ourselves that our ego is right or like our ego is better than someone else. Like it's just much easier to live in this way. And I don't think that I could fully access that part of me until this experience. It's also much easier to keep in mind now that when I experience that feeling of fear, knowing that it's the opposite of love helps me to redirect and kind of like correct my compass. And so if I'm feeling scared about something, I can see it more of a symptom of something that needs to be addressed within me versus like a self-protective mechanism. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just kind of how I feel. I can't overstate that I never would have made a video like this prior to my psychedelic experience. I would have been way too afraid of what people would think of me. There are a lot of people who will watch this video from my personal life who will think that I have absolutely gone off the deep end. I don't care. Like, I'm not bothered at all, because I know that this experience was the most profoundly healing experience of my life, and I know that this is a really powerful tool for transformation for people that feel called to it. And so there's just no amount of like feedback I could get that's like fear-mongering that would, like, I don't feel afraid. I realize that a lot of this video is very like ethereal and metaphysical in nature, and I think that's why it's so hard for people to articulate what these experiences are like. But I do feel like it's important to do so, because if they are this transformational for literally everyone I've known who's had a psychedelic experience has had an incredibly profound transformational experience. And so as hard as it is to articulate, I think it's worth it to try. We are going to be coming out with a video. My channel is not all about mushrooms. It's about healing and feeling and living and loving. But my husband and I are going to put together a little bit of a guide of things that you should know if you are looking to have a plant medicine experience, things that we kind of have collected along the way because we want to be a helpful resource. So definitely stay tuned for that if you're interested, and please subscribe if you like this kind of content. If you've made it this far, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.